north to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings, my name is John David Wells. Welcome to the broadcast. Good to have you here. And you're saying to yourself, okay, that's great. It's great to be here. But what is here? Well, this is the Wells Report. We report the news honestly and fairly here. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. We make commentary. That's just opinion, yours and mine. And we debate. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for joining us today. Our telephone number is 817-999-4499, 817-999-4499. The din, the constant din of climate, shall we say hoaxsters, or shall we say people trying to edge everybody into anxiety about the end of the planet, have a lot of explaining to do in my view. And it's because of Canadian wildfires that are inundating the entire United States with smoke that seems to be relentless. In other words, what are they doing about the wildfires? I don't know that they can do much. But what does this have to do with climate? Well, it has a lot to do with it, but let me give you the news first. This from John Bacon. He's a very good journalist. He's very straightforward in his reporting. He actually reports facts. I remember when we were covering some of the COVID-19 things. He had something every day. He and his coworkers put up COVID-19 updates that were spot on in most cases. Did they repeat the propaganda of the day? Yes. But that propaganda was indeed news. Not so much of what it said, but that it was propaganda in the first place. We identified that here on the Wells Report. But John Bacon's good at this. He reports as follows: New Yorkers woke up to the worst urban air quality in the world. That happened this morning. And millions of Americans could face days or even weeks of the smoky siege from the drifting haze of unrelenting Canadian wildfires. The low-pressure system adrift over Maine and Nova Scotia has helped funnel the ashen air, and it will be hanging around for at least the next few days, according to National Weather Service meteorologist Brian Ramsey. Conditions are likely to remain unhealthy until the wind changes direction and the fires are doused. Since the fires are raging, they're really large, and they're probably going to continue for weeks. It's just really going to be all about the wind shift. The good news, according to AccuWeather Meteorology, which is the best in the business, is that parts of the Northeast could see modest air quality improvements throughout the day today, although it will take until Friday or Friday night for significant improvement in some locations. The bad news is some of the most dense smoke may shift west toward Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Detroit. And that's something to keep in mind. We've been in touch with my 89-year-old father-in-law in Pennsylvania. They are indeed affected by this as well. And I'm sure that your family members in the northern reaches of the United States would probably like to hear from you too. The air quality monitoring website IQAir.com in New York City had New York at the top of its list. Tel Aviv and Israel was second. Detroit was third. Authorities warned residents across much of the Northeast to stay inside, limit or avoid outdoor activities today, extending code red alerts in some places for a third straight day. People. Code red. Really? One of these days, I really hope the drama queens involved in journalism find some other way to report the news to us. The word bombshell and code red and all of these things, overused. Just report the facts. Just report the facts. We're grown people. We can handle the truth. For crying out loud, code red. It's code red. Code red. You've got to be kidding me. Apparently not. Okie dokie. Low visibility from the haze forced a ground stop of all flights out of New York's LaGuardia Airport, which of course has domino effects all over the nation. More than 400 blazes are burning across Canada. They've left 20,000 people displaced. The U.S. has sent more than 600 firefighters and equipment to Canada. A primary culprit for fouling U.S. air are 150 fires burning in south central Quebec. That's the majority of which are still not contained. A stalled high pressure system over the northern plains and the stationary low pressure system over Canada has produced a steering wind from north to south, sending the thick plumes of smoke into the northeast, middle Atlantic, Ohio Valley. This, according to AccuWeather senior meteorologist Brett Anderson. The fires are mostly in remote wooded areas, and since most of Canada's firefighting focus is on saving homes, the blazes are likely to continue burning into the summer. Get used to these episodes of smoke and haze through the summer of 2023. New Jersey could move out of red alert status today. Red alert. Red alert. Air quality alert remains in effect for New Jersey through Thursday night. That's tonight. It is forecast to drop on Thursday from red alert, which means it's unhealthy for the general population, to an orange alert. Will a lime alert and a lemon alert be following very, very closely? This won't citrus well with the people in New Jersey. See what I did there? Never mind. We're looking at staying with this, or we're looking at this staying with us to some degree Thursday and into the weekend, according to National Service meteorologist John Cristinello. Let's see, what do we have here? 1 million N95 filtering masks will be made available across New York State Thursday, according to Governor Kathy Hochul. More than 400,000 will be distributed to New Yorkers at subway and bus stations and state parks. Another 600,000 made available for local governments to pick up and distribute. You don't need to go out and take a walk. You don't need to push the baby in the stroller. It's not a safe time to do that. Can a national health emergency be next? Can lockdowns be next for New York? What do you think? Is this the new COVID? Red alert. Ah! Well, it's possible. Jesse said, what about a grapefruit alert? Good point. Let's see. Another reason to force masks. Yeah, I was going to do something here. I was going to wait until the break, but I think I'm just going to do it now. I thought of something today that I was really concerned about, because I think that the left, in its strange craziness towards sexuality in America, both among American citizens and our children, I came up with this thought today. What if all the people that have been demanding that all of us wear masks are actually kind of sexually deviant in some way? And you're saying, what? I know. Bear with me. There is such a thing as mask fetishism. These are people who want to see other people wearing masks. The mask may be a Halloween mask, a surgical mask, a ski mask, a ninja mask, a gas mask, a latex mask, or any other kind of mask. Strange, masking tape isn't actually mentioned here. So what if all these people that keep wanting to put us in masks, what if they just have a sexual mask fetish? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you get on this broadcast that you can't find any place else. We connect the dots here. What if these people are just weirdos? I want to see everybody in a mask, especially the surgical ones. Just goes to show you that those yearly physicals that you take your kids to might be grooming. Okay, kidding. Yeah. Jesse says, my God, that's gross. But it sure does seem fitting for Pride Month. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about this. I want to talk about this Canadian wildfire jazz. I want to talk about this climate stuff. Okay? When I first moved to California in the, it would have been the early 70s. Los Angeles was so smoggy, your eyes burned. That's pretty much the way the air quality is in a lot of the great Midwestern cities and the Northeastern cities as we speak. It was that way for decades. People joked about it. A combination of smoke and fog known as smog. And you know what? That was just LA. That was just LA. This is virtually the entire northern tier of the United States of America. Because of that smog in LA, environmentalists decided that every car needed to run better. Every single one. And they put these debilitating pieces of equipment on our cars that made them run like crap. But technology moved forward, and suddenly we have cars that don't put out smog at all, and they've been in the mix since the mid-'80s. Your car doesn't put out smoke. It doesn't put out smog. It doesn't put out pollution. By the way, for the purposes of this discussion, it is my opinion that carbon dioxide is not pollution. If it wasn't for carbon dioxide, there'd be no life on this planet at all. This would be a dead planet. And so you go through all of this stuff and you're looking at all this smoke coming out of Canada. Well, okay. How much smoke is that? What is the actual impact on our atmosphere? And I was trying to figure that out because there's no real way. There's no real way of making a decision on this. There's no real way of doing research on this. So take this with the gigantic grain of salt that you should. But it seems to me that these Canadian wildfires at one stroke have put out more smog into the United States atmosphere than automobiles have done from one end of the country, automobiles, trucks, trains, everything. It seems to me that these wildfires have put more smoke and smog and pollution into the air than all those vehicles combined for the last 30 years at least. So what do you suppose these environmentalists, these climatologists, these climate hoaxsters, what's the solution? You know, this show's about truth and solutions, right? Well, here's some truth and here's some solutions. They're going to be coming up next. Here's the truth. The smoke that's coming into the United States from Canada has polluted our atmosphere more than every car you've ever seen for the last 30 years. What will the climatologists, what will these climate advocates, these climate militants, what will they suggest next? I know. As a matter of fact, I know exactly what the solution is to this problem, and I'm going to share it with you. And I can hardly wait until I hear Al Gore following in my footsteps. A solution to all this smoke in a moment. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. This is me talking into a closed microphone. This is the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. Thanks very much for joining us. Canadian wildfires polluting the United States of America to the tune of something we have not seen for decades, of a half century at least. We haven't seen this kind of air pollution since the 60s. And it's all because of Canadian wildfires. Now, you got to keep something in mind. The timeline about 3 years ago was 10 years to the extinction of the planet. So, I don't know if that's actually going to happen. I think we should all be dancing in the streets naked. But let's just move on from that, okay? That being said, no, we have to do something. The only thing that we can do to save the planet from extinction in 7 years is to pay more taxes to politicians to control the weather. Yeah, well, okay, go ahead and run with that. But let's take a look at it from their point of view. Everything that puts smoke in the air is going to kill the planet. Well, we have wildfires. What are the wildfires burning? That's right. Forests. So it seems to me the only thing that we can do as responsible stewards of this planet is to chop down every tree, every piece of vegetation on the planet, because it might catch fire. I mean, if my gas furnace and my gas stove is going to destroy the planet in 7 years, and we've seen more pollution out of these wildfires, and we'll see more throughout the entire summer, then we got to do something about these forests. We got to go in there and clear cut the whole dang thing down, especially those redwoods. That can you imagine the amount of smoke that a redwood tree would emit? Good heavens to Betsy, they're hundreds of feet tall. They're 10-story buildings and more. Good heavens, they'll put out smoke for a month. That's just one tree. We got to get rid of all of them. Every single bit of it. In other words, we have to bald the entire world. That's right. We have to make the entire world bald. We've got to get rid of those trees because they can burn and cause irreparable damage to the atmosphere. Don't you agree? I mean, seriously, don't you agree that that's the thing to do? I mean, Al Gore right now, he's not using oil to oil up his chainsaw because that's a fossil fuel. He's using graphite, which means that he'll have to replace the chainsaw about every hour and a half. But the thing about it is that he's got the money to buy as many chainsaws as he needs to chop down every tree he sees. Because that is the only way we're going to save our planet. I just thought of something. I know this is where would all the birds live? Well, they'll just join the polar bears that drowned because they couldn't find any ice to sit on. They're just going to have to go the way of all things. Yeah. Or you can stand out in your front yard like this. Sooner or later, a bird's going to land there, build a nest. I don't know what you're going to do with the poop, but because you certainly can't wash your hands while you're holding baby birds. What do you think? Yeah, trees are oxygen producers. Well, my God, oxygen, that sustains us. We're the big problem, ask these same climate people. We're the problem. Because they say, well, these wildfires aren't the problem, it's people. If we get rid of the oxygen on the planet, we'll get rid of the people, and the planet will be saved. You know what's disturbing? You could actually see that happening, couldn't you? This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more in just a moment. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will be back in 4 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. You're saying debate. How do we debate? Well, there are a couple of ways to do it. Here's what you do. You go to Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. Although we do have a comment from YouTube today. Good. Sometimes you can get through to the chat room on YouTube. Sometimes you can't. I don't know what that is, but for the last couple of days, we've had a little trouble with it. Let's see. By the way, Isaac Tate, who's a Democrat, says, you might have a point there, JD. I mean, ask the people of Pompeii. They know that the planet kills them. Oh, yes, they do. Yeah. Now, that was air pollution. That was smog right there in Pompeii. I would really like to ask some of the people in Pompeii just exactly what that was like. I can see myself right now, camera crew, everything like that. Me with a microphone going, so what was it like when the volcano erupted? And they'd answer, cruel? Okay. There's breaking news. There is breaking news, and here it is. Today, the Supreme Court struck down Republican-drawn congressional districts in Alabama that civil rights activists say discriminated against black voters in a surprise reaffirmation of the landmark Voting Rights Act. The court, in a 5-4 vote, ruled against Alabama, meaning the map of the 7 congressional districts which heavily favored Republicans will now be redrawn. Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Brett Kavanaugh both joined conservatives and 3 liberals in the majority. Chief Justice John Roberts, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, both conservatives, joined 3 liberals in the majority. In doing so, the court, which has a 6-3 conservative majority, turned away the state's effort to make it harder to remedy concerns raised by civil rights advocates that the power of black voters in states like Alabama is being diluted by dividing voters into districts where white voters dominate. The 2 consolidated cases arose from litigation over the new congressional district map drawn by the Republican-controlled Alabama legislature after the 2020 census. The challengers included individual voters and the Alabama State Conference of the NAACP, saying the map violated Section 2 of the 1965 Voting Rights Act by discriminating against black voters. The new map created one district out of 7 in the state, which black voters could likely be able to elect a candidate of their choosing. The challengers say that the state, which has a population that is more than 1/4 black, should have 2 such districts and provided evidence that such a district could be drawn. A lower court agreed in a January 2022 ruling, saying that under the Supreme Court precedent, the plaintiffs had shown the Alabama's black population was both large enough and sufficiently compact for there to be a second majority black district. The court ordered a new map to be drawn. The state's Republican Attorney General, Steve Marshall, turned to the Supreme Court, which put the litigation on hold and agreed to hear the case. The Supreme Court was divided 5-4 in allowing the new map to be used in November's election, with conservative Justice John Roberts joining the court's 3 liberals in dissent. Republicans won 6 of the 7 seats in the election, while Democrats won the majority black districts. With black voters more likely to vote for Democrats, Democrats may have picked up an additional seat if the new map is adopted. The Alabama case was one of several in which the Supreme Court's decisions may have contributed to Republicans in winning their fragile majority in the House of Representatives. Alabama argued the lower court put too much emphasis on race in reaching its conclusions. Marshall said in court papers the fact that the challengers were able to show it was possible to draw a second majority black district was not sufficient evidence that the state's actions were discriminatory. He cited other traditional race-neutral map drawing factors that take into account such issues as regional culture and identity, as well as requirements the district have similar-sized populations. The Supreme Court has, in 2 cases over the last decade, weakened the Voting Rights Act, beginning in 2013, when it gutted a key provision of the law that allowed for federal oversight of election law changes in certain states. In a 2021 ruling arising from Arizona, the court made it more difficult to bring cases under Section 2. The case is one of 3 the court is hearing in its current term, which conservative lawyers are pushing what they call race-neutral arguments, favoring the right favored on the right as a way to remedy race discrimination. In others, the court could end affirmative action in court admissions and strike down part of a law that gives preference to Native Americans seeking to adopt Native American children. The court is also considering another significant election-related dispute in its current term. The court is set to rule on a Republican effort to curb the ability of state courts to enforce state constitutional provisions in federal elections. That ruling, due before the end of June, would make it easier for Republican legislatures to restrict voting rights, so says NBC in a terribly biased report. So, what do we have here? Here's what we have. We have what I consider to be a clear violation of the balance of powers in the United States government as enumerated in the Constitution of the United States, but the Supreme Court is the last authority. The buck truly stops there, and they have ruled. So now we look at this from a different point of view. One of the things about American politics, American party politics to be specific, is that the party with the most members in a particular state legislature get to redraw the maps. They get to reapportion the districts that people vote in. What does this do? What's the actual effect of this long-standing American policy? Well, each side draws their maps to benefit themselves. And what does it take to overcome that advantage that parties cede to themselves in the states? What does it take? It takes better policy than the particular party that's in charge. You have to go out and you have to convince voters that your ideas are better. First of all, to do that, the ideas have to be better. Second of all, what this does, the frank effect of all of this, is provide better public policy for the voters in general. In general. Of all the voting rights issues that I've seen that were settled in the courts, which is a huge mistake, of all the voting rights things I've seen in the court, this one has set a dangerous precedent. So what motivates the party out of power to remake themselves into something people will vote for? If all they have to do is go to a courtroom somewhere and have unelected judges in most cases, certainly in the case of the Supreme Court of the United States, why would you bother coming up with better policy when you can strong arm your way through the court system? Now, I got to say something here. You know how I feel about racism. It's a crime against humanity. But in this particular situation, this is also a tradition of party politics. The Democrats do it the same way. Do we see Republicans rushing to court to get districts redrawn? Occasionally. But most of the time, it's Democrats out of power agitating for the court to do what they will not do by convincing voters their ideas are better. So we don't get as many good ideas. We don't force a malfunctioning party of either side, by the way, from remaking themselves into something that people want to vote for. What's the impetus? The answer is nothing. Nothing. That's thing number one. The other thing about this decision really concerns me. It's not so much this decision, but the decisions that may follow on. That last part in the story that talks about how the Supreme Court is going to see what they can do about limiting what a state can do in a federal election. Really? As we found out through the court system itself in the 2020 election, there are no federal elections. There are 50 separate state elections for the President of the United States. 50 separate ones, which is why all these very same courts sat there and said, well, the federal government has no standing in any of these voting disputes. Toss the case. Gone. So here we go again in a situation where now who's interfering with the elections of the people of the United States? Now it's the judicial system. Now look, I don't have any problem with that. I don't have any trouble with that at all. If the courts want to play politics, then they should face the electorate. What we should do is immediately stop, absolutely stop, cease all appointments for the judiciary, especially in the federal judiciary. These people should have to run for their offices because they want to play politics. We know that to be true because all manner of politically based lawsuits that find themselves into the federal court system are decided by politics. So let's elect them. Let's elect Supreme Court justices to 12-year terms. Let's do that. Let's actually, if they want to play politics, let them. There's also another problem here. So Brett Kavanaugh joined John Roberts in siding with the liberals of the court to make this decision. So was that assassin showing up at his doorstep successful? Was that successful? Seems like. It seems like. I'm just putting it out there. Why would Brett Kavanaugh interfere in a state election? There are no federal elections in the United States. There are elections in the United States, each of the United States, that settle federal issues like the presidency. But those are state elections. So once again, we see a schism in the judicial branch based on politics. Fine. Let's elect all the judges. We do that here in Texas. We elect our Supreme Court justices in Texas. We're doing fine. These people who don't face the electorate, well, all I can say is that it was intended to keep us from having a political judiciary. So let me ask you this question. Do we have a political federal judiciary? Yes or no? And tell me why. 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Do we have a political judiciary? Yes or no? You tell me. Was the intimidation of conservative justices, was that indeed effective? By the way, in this NBC News article, and we'll talk more about this probably tomorrow, in this NBC News article, they didn't mention the dissenting side. They didn't mention the dissenters. Clarence Thomas. Where's Samuel Alito on this one? What was their dissenting opinion? Did they issue one? We don't know. It's a breaking story. We'll see. We'll have more information on that. John Roberts is not someone who bases his decisions on politics. John Roberts bases his decisions on personal aggrandizement. John Roberts is looking for a place in history. He's looking to be the center of conversation about the philosophies and vagaries of the Supreme Court in history books from now until whenever. But Brett Kavanaugh may have been shaken by somebody trying to kill him at his own doorstep. This judicial intimidation may have worked. Chuck Schumer calling down the thunder on these Supreme Court justices may have been effective. Because remember, they're not ruling on law here. They're ruling on politics. Am I the only one that sees that? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Please give me a buzz and tell me what you think. With this political decision that, in my mind, violates the separation of powers, in this particular decision, has the Supreme Court created a circumstance whereby they're playing politics? There's also another, shall we say, caveat to this. Gary from Fort Polk, Louisiana, always hassles me with the use of the caveat. But there is another one. We'll have that in just a couple of moments. Stick around. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to The Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We're talking about a brand new, freshly announced decision that forces Alabama to redraw its congressional maps. The judicial branch of the government interfering with the political process in the United States. Now it's the law of the land. There must be a redrawn set of districts. And so I got someone who was a Democrat who said, hey, by the way, did you have those same feelings about the Supreme Court when they overturned Roe v. Wade? It wasn't a political decision. The Supreme Court made a flawed judgment when it adopted the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973. The Supreme Court of the United States corrected the legal problem, which was again turned into a political mess by the mainstream media. The leftist mainstream media. African Americans have experienced voter suppression for decades. Why can't you accept that the Alabama law was fraud and racist? Okay, so if this particular law drawing these districts was fraud and racist, we can expect that when the Democrat Party takes power in Alabama, they're going to be completely and straightforward in their apportionment of districts along racial lines. We can expect that, right? Or not? Answer. Bringing us to the caveats. What is one of the biggest issues surrounding race in the United States? By golly, it's institutional racism. Did this decision just institutionalize more racism? Or are voters just voters? The Supreme Court of the United States made it very, very plain. They said there should be two districts given to black voters. I wonder if there's going to be a lawsuit now, say, for example, in Philadelphia or places around Philadelphia and Pennsylvania where there are districts given to white voters. Where does this end? What do we do? Well, what we do is we sit back and we kind of try to figure out just exactly how are we going to end racial discrimination based on institutional racism when the government itself, all three parts of it, practice institutional racism as a matter of public policy. How's that going to happen? How exactly is that going to come down? I wonder. By the way, this same friend of ours who's a Democrat says, well, wait a minute, Republicans can go to the court and challenge. Sure they can. But do they? No. Why not? Because they're losers. That's why. Because they're losers. In Alabama, this case is plain. The Democrat Party can't win in the voting booth. So they win in the courtroom. And it happens over and over and over. And you're saying, good. It's all about fairness. Fantastic. We got to have all this stuff. Okay. Okay. I don't have any problem with that. That's fine. Okay. That's fine. But the thing about it is what drives the Democrat Party to make better policy decisions, create better policy ideas, get voters to follow those policy ideas, when all they have to do is go into a courtroom and let the courtroom do their work for them? The answer is nothing. The Democrat Party is going to stay where it is until they actually have to compete. Compete in the court of ideas, not in some cockamamie court of law. And yeah, this isn't law here. This is the court of politics now. And again, I have no problem with the Supreme Court being the court of politics. I have no problem with the appeals courts being the court of politics. But if they're going to be the courts of politics, then let's do this. Let's elect those judges. Let's elect those judges. We can do it every 4 years. Do it every 4 years. There are 9 justices. What we'll do in the first election cycle is elect or not elect 3 of them to a 12-year term. In the next 4-year elections, we'll elect another 3 of them to a 12-year term. In the third election cycle, in 12 years, we'll vote the third group and the first group back to 12-year terms. And we'll just keep doing that until the court either recognizes the fact that the court is in itself political, or our country gets better because the right people are sitting in judgment of the country based on the votes of the people. I can't believe that there would be people here that would say, no, we can't turn these lofty offices to the whims of the voters. I wonder who would be making that argument. Would it be Republicans or would it be Democrats that say the voters really shouldn't be choosing their own judges? Well, who keeps winning in court over political issues? This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks very much for watching. We'll be back with more of the second hour, in fact, in just a couple of moments. This is the Wells Report. Thanks for listening to the Wells Report, more of which continues in 6 minutes. You found the Wells Report, more of which continues in 5 minutes. You're listening to The Wells Report, which will be back in 4 minutes. This is The Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is The Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to The Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. North to south, coast to coast, around the world, this is The Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We report the news honestly and fairly. We analyze the news for fact and bias, and we point out both. We make commentary, not the news. Commentary is not news. Commentary is opinion, both yours and mine, and so we debate. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. The only bias on this broadcast is constitutional, Bill of Rights, the Federalist, not the Federalist website. The Federalist. The Federalist Papers, you might know them as. That's where the politics of this broadcast lie. And if indeed it sounds partisan, read the Constitution again. Just saying. There was other breaking news last night, and here it is from the Wall Street Journal. China and Cuba have reached a secret agreement for China to establish an electronic eavesdropping facility on the island. This is a geopolitical challenge by Beijing against the United States. An eavesdropping facility in Cuba, roughly 100 miles from Florida, would allow Chinese intelligence services to scoop up electronic communication throughout the southeastern U.S., where many military bases are located, and monitor United States ship traffic. Officials familiar with the matter say that China has agreed to pay cash-strapped Cuba several $billions to allow it to build the eavesdropping station, and that the two countries have reached an agreement in principle. The revelation about the planned site has sparked alarm within the Biden administration because of Cuba's proximity to the U.S. mainland. Washington regards Beijing as its most significant economic and military rival. A Chinese base with advanced military and intelligence capabilities in the U.S.'s backyard could be an unprecedented new threat. Quote, while I cannot speak to this specific report, we are well aware of and have spoken many times to the People's Republic of China and their efforts to invest in infrastructure around the world that may have military purposes, including in this hemisphere, said spokesman John Kirby. He is a spokesman for the National Security Council. We monitor it closely, take steps to counter it, and remain confident that we are able to meet all of our security commitments at home, in the region, and around the world. U.S. officials described the intelligence on the planned Cuba site apparently gathered in recent weeks as convincing. They said the base would enable China to conduct signals intelligence, SIGINT, known in the espionage world as that, which would include the monitoring of a range of communications, including emails, phone calls, and satellite transmissions. The Chinese embassy in Washington had no comment. Cuba's embassy did not respond to a request for comment. Officials declined to provide more details about the proposed location of the listening station or whether the construction had indeed begun. It could not be determined what, if anything, the Biden administration would do to stop the completion of the facility. The U.S. has intervened before to stop foreign powers from extending their influence in the Western Hemisphere, most notably during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. The U.S. and the Soviet Union came to the brink of nuclear war after the Soviets deployed nuclear-capable missiles to Cuba, prompting a U.S. Navy quarantine of the island. Soviet submarines that were part of the attempt to bring those missiles to Cuba carried nuclear torpedoes. One of them was almost fired. The Soviets backed down, removed the missiles. A few months later, the U.S. quietly removed intermediate-range ballistic missiles from Turkey that the Soviets had complained about. The intelligence on the new base comes in the midst of Biden administration efforts to improve U.S.-China relations after months of acrimony following a Chinese spy balloon flight over the U.S. earlier this year. Last month, President Biden sent Central Intelligence Agency Director William Burns on a secret trip to Beijing, and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan held talks with a top Chinese official in Vienna. It could not be determined whether the planned Chinese eavesdropping station figured in those exchanges. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is expected to travel to Beijing later this month and possibly meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Biden said in May he believed there would be a thaw in U.S.-China relations despite recent public tensions. Beijing is likely to argue the base in Cuba is justified because of U.S. military and intelligence services close to China, specifically Taiwan, which they did not mention specifically. U.S. military aircraft fly over the South China Sea, engaging in electronic surveillance, that same SIGINT that I was discussing. The U.S. sells arms to Taiwan, which China considers a renegade province, and deploys a small amount of troops there to train its military and sails Navy ships through the Taiwan Strait. And so, what do we have here? What we have here is we have something that we must discuss for several different reasons. The United States did indeed, in the early 60s, have nuclear missiles trained on the Soviet Union based in Turkey. The Soviet Union said, okay, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And so they put missiles on Cuba. It brought us to the brink of World War III between nuclear superpowers. John F. Kennedy stared down that incursion into the Western Hemisphere, establishing the Kennedy Doctrine that if you're communist, if you are an enemy of the United States of America, you will not have access to the Western Hemisphere. And it stuck until China, annoyed at the United States support of Taiwan, which is also an island right off the coast of China, and most certainly involves eavesdropping on the western part the eastern part of the country of China. They said, well, it's justified. What's good for the goose is good for the gander again. Does Joe Biden have the will to stare down the Chinese on this? You answer me. You tell me. Does Joe Biden have the moxie? Does he have the guts to tell China to stop that construction immediately or face military action? Because that's exactly what John F. Kennedy did. I have long drawn distinctions against Kennedy Democrats and the Democrats that are currently in power in these United States. That particular latter group saw the election of Joe Biden, slapping themselves on the back. My gosh, we saved ourselves from being categorized as openly socialist. We defeated the evil, terrible communist onslaught that was happening right there in the primaries of their own Democrat primaries. And so they put Joe Biden in office. And so here we are with a president that literally cannot walk across the stage, that will not, after declaring that he's running for the presidency again, will not debate, will not even campaign. He scarcely did last time, which was the basis for my assertion that he was installed in the presidency. And so Bernie Sanders, defeated by Joe Biden, of all the people they could pick, Joe Biden? Well, there were probably reasons for that. I mean, obviously, Joe Biden has been wrong on every foreign policy decision he's ever made in office. And oh, by the way, he can be manipulated. We don't have any idea who's running the Biden administration. But when you consider all the policy reversals, and you really can't because it's Joe Biden, so policy reversals blow in the wind, based on the latest gaffe, based on the latest political imperative, based on all of those things. All we know is that someone else is running the Biden administration. We know that. And they were not elected. They were not elected to office. So here we are. The next chapter of communist incursion into the Western Hemisphere, violating the Kennedy Doctrine. Red China wants to overwhelm us, just as the Soviet Union did. I dealt with anxiety and anger and just plain fear as I lived through the Soviet-American Cold War. And here we are again. What did the Cold War accomplish? Well, it pushed both nations beyond the current level of technology at the time in the 1960s into what was an American technological behemoth and the defeat of the Soviet Union, so much so that they struck their flag over the Kremlin and removed themselves from power, at least overt public power. Will that happen in China? I don't know. Anybody that stands up and says, no, the Chinese Communist Party is wrong for our nation and we need to do something about it, like that guy who stood in front of the T-55 tank in Tiananmen Square. Whatever happened to him? Re-education camp? Immediate execution. Some guy with a AK-47 and a bayonet standing behind him in full dress uniform as he knelt on the ground, the bayonet touching the base of his spine before the AK-47 round destroyed his brain and everything that it controlled? Or did he just go to a re-education camp and became a happy supporter of the Communist Party of China? Either way, he disappeared. Greetings, this is the Wells Report. Welcome to the broadcast. Hi, who's this?
Hi, it's Gary from Fort Polk, Louisiana.
We were talking about you today and my use of the word caveat.
Yes, I heard. I responded with multiple laughs. Yes, and I do that. Yes, you're right.
Well, we should have a vocabulary word of the day, I suppose.
Why not? Why not? It adds color to this, this
otherwise bland broadcast. Hey, thanks very much for calling. Got to go. Very busy. Oh, I'm sorry. So, well, let me ask you this question. Does Joe Biden have the stuff of John F. Kennedy?
No, not at all. And, I mean, look, it's obvious. I mean, this is what... Obviously. No, I'm sorry. Somebody just grabbed me. Look, I mean, it's obvious. It's water under the bridge. You know, he's being guided by folks that are running this country. That's done. The big difference is Kennedy actually had a good support team around him, which I had family members in the Pentagon at that time. And the Soviets don't remotely have, and they still don't have the technology to, wage and win against us.
Well, they certainly did in 1962. They absolutely did.
Story. They're a lot more advanced. They're on point, and I'm sorry, but people in this country are bought and paid for by the communist Chinese government. So it's not good. And he doesn't have the stuff to stand up to them. He doesn't know how anyway.
All right. Thanks, Gary. I appreciate your phone call. Telephone number 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. A communist incursion into the Western Hemisphere. Something we've done before. It took us to the brink of World War III. Yes, there was a Soviet pretext with missiles in Turkey. They decided, okay, we'll put missiles in Cuba. America has intelligence capability on the country of Taiwan, which is an island right off the coast of Red China. And now another incursion into the Western Hemisphere. Will the United States respond? If so, how? This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. A communist incursion into the Western Hemisphere. A listening station apparently being built as we speak on the island of Cuba after billions upon billions of dollars are being offered by Red China to that nation. That, as they said, tortured island back in the 60s. I referenced the Cold War. Someone on the chat room also did so. I remember the Cold War. I remember the air raid drills, the duck and cover, second and third grade. I've talked about what I would do under those circumstances if indeed the missiles were flying. Would I try to find some place to save myself? No. Would I try to find some place to save my family? No. I would essentially, because I don't know what world we'd have after the missiles struck. No, I think what I'd do is I'd take a chaise lounge, sit in the front, sip some excellent single malt scotch, not made in Scotland, by the way, made in Texas, because arguably one of the top 3 scotches in the in the entire world is made by Bent Distilleries. And I'd sit there and watch. I'd watch the flash, I'd hear the boom, and I'd wait for the shockwave. And so we have a problem. There is a new Cold War. This is the official beginning of it. This 8th day of June, year of our Lord 2023. We don't have a president that can stand up to the Chinese, and they know it. I knew that China would be moving against the United States during this administration. I did not know why, beyond the fact that Joe Biden is demonstrably weak, which was an error in judgment by Nikita Khrushchev in 1960 when he met with John F. Kennedy in Vienna. He came away saying, this guy's weak, we can take him out. And they decided to put missiles in Cuba. John F. Kennedy was a different kind of man. And now what we have is another incursion into the Western Hemisphere by another communist power, this time seeking at this particular moment, they say, simply signals intelligence, electronic eavesdropping on the military bases on the southeastern coast of the United States. Well, there's that. It's one of these things. It's one of these things that you look at and you look downstream from, which we do very, very well here on the Wells Report. We knew that there would be anti-American incursions or anti-American ally incursions when Joe Biden became the president of the United States. What were the people thinking that installed him into the presidency? I'm talking about voters. What were you thinking? Did you honestly believe that that wasn't going to happen? Oops, wrong answer. So a new Cold War. Our children and grandchildren get to live through what we lived through in the 60s and 70s. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Did it push both the United States and the Soviet Union into technological achievements that we have yet to replicate? Yes. Arguably, was it good for both economies? Absolutely. Did it almost end in disaster? Uh-huh. Will this one actually end in disaster? This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We'll be back with more coming up in just a couple of moments. Stay where you are. There's more news right around the corner. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will be back in 4 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks very much for joining us. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. I have long said that if people wanted to do something about the Second Amendment, they should try a constitutional amendment. Well, someone finally has. California Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom wants to change the Constitution to curb gun rights. Fed up with inaction on gun control, Newsom unveiled a proposed 28th Amendment to the Constitution that would implement common sense gun safety measures he claims have widespread bipartisan support. Our ability to make a more perfect union is literally written into the Constitution. Correct. So today, I'm proposing the 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution to do just that. The 28th Amendment will enshrine in the Constitution common sense gun safety measures that Democrats, Republicans, independents, and gun owners overwhelmingly support, while leaving the Second Amendment unchanged and respecting America's gun-owning tradition. Newsom's proposal comes after federal courts have delivered a series of victories for gun rights activists, led by the Supreme Court's landmark decision last year, striking down a centuries-old New York law that made it difficult to obtain a license to carry a concealed handgun. The Democrat governor's proposed 28th Amendment would not abolish the Second Amendment, which establishes a right to bear firearms for personal defense. By the way, that's Fox News. It does not establish a right to bear firearms for personal self-defense. It protects the right to bear firearms for defense of this nation from its own government. What's Fox News doing? Moving on. However, that by the way was my opinion. However, it would raise the federal minimum age to purchase a firearm from 18 to 21, mandate universal background checks to purchase firearms, institute a waiting period for all gun purchases, and ban assault weapons. The proposed amendment would also affirm that Congress, states, and local governments can enact additional gun control measures. The Constitution can be amended by either Congress or a convention of the states under Article 5. Congress can pass a proposed amendment with a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate, sending it to the states for ratification. With Republicans in control of the House and a 51 Democrat majority in the Senate, there is no chance a constitutional amendment restricting gun rights will have enough support to pass through Congress, which brings us back to the realm of politics. We'll get to that in a minute. Instead, Newsom is calling for an Article 5 convention of the states to convene and draft his proposed amendment. 2/3 of the state legislatures must pass a resolution calling for such a convention before it can convene to consider an amendment to the Constitution. If a convention adopts a proposed amendment, then it heads back to the state legislatures for ratification. 3/4 of the states, 3/4 of the states must ratify a proposed amendment to be added to the Constitution, a rare and difficult feat that has only been accomplished 27 times in the nation's history. Actually, it was 17 times. The Bill of Rights was essentially done early on, so it's more like 17. But yeah, I suppose you could say 27 times, sure, but the Bill of Rights is essentially thought of as a singular document. Newsom said he will campaign to build grassroots support and lobby other state legislatures to move forward with an Article 5 convention. A news release from his office included supporting statements from California lawmakers in the state assembly and the Senate. Gun rights groups were quick to condemn Newsom's proposal as an attack on the Second Amendment. Quote, "We've always warned those who cherish their God-given liberties that the ultimate goal of the anti-gunners was the abolishment of the Second Amendment," said Eric Pratt, Senior Vice President of Gun Owners of America. While they often try to hide behind legislative proposals and hush open talk of abolishing the Second Amendment, here we have a potential future president now coming out and openly admitting that they've wanted to do it all along, said Pratt. Gun owners of America will strongly Gun owners of America will strongly Gun owners of America will strongly oppose this proposal as we work to protect and restore the Second Amendment rights of all Americans. Where do you think this is going to go? What do you think this is going to create? The 28th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States? An Article 5 convention of the states to make it happen? 3/4 of the state legislatures having to approve this? Where does this go? Well, let's discuss it. First of all, I have no problem whatsoever with anyone attempting to amend the Constitution of the United States. It's a heavy lift. Will Gavin Newsom be successful? Well, I'm pretty sure that the answer would be no. However, I'm still trying to figure out just exactly what's going on with American elections. Mike Pence, for example, said that there were anomalies in the 2020 election. He's running for president. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on here. But let's assume that everything's okay. Let's assume our votes count. Let's assume that this is still the United States of America. First of all, would it remain so after the 28th Amendment was adopted? I wonder. But let's move on. What would happen? If indeed this amendment passed, based on the description we've heard, it hasn't been written yet, well, there would be a deeper division in the United States. One that could be the precursor to an honest civil war. That's thing number one. Thing number two on this particular circumstance is, why doesn't he go through the Congress? Why doesn't he do it through the legislature and do it that way? Chances are pretty likely, if he was elected president, he would do just that. Would it find any success? No. No, it wouldn't. Because it would be bad for political business, which takes us to the third circumstance. The third circumstance being, this guy's running for president and he's throwing stuff on the table to be considered, cloaking himself in the bipartisanship of what is called common sense gun law. Common sense gun law makes the people using guns in crimes pay dearly for their decision. Trying to paint everybody in America as someone who's about to commit a gun crime and then legislating against it is tyranny. Nothing more, nothing less. And so, here we are. Here we are. I don't have any problem with this. I don't. But let's talk a little bit more about the politics. The Article 5 Convention of the States. Is he of the mind that that would be the only amendment that would be put forward and agreed to one way or another? No. He's not thinking about that at all. If indeed there was an Article 5 Convention of the States, this country would change, and it wouldn't change toward the favor of a Democrat governor who is destroying California. I assure you. A lot of people have been talking about an Article 5 convention for a very, very long time. I think that probably more good than bad would come out of it. But this 28th Amendment has no chance. But it does solidify both the opinion of Gavin Newsom as regards the Second Amendment of the United States, and it also clearly delineates the fact that, just as the Gun Owners of America president said, that these people are trying to circumvent, if you will, infringe on the Second Amendment. And as we also know, not only do they wish to infringe on the Second Amendment, but they have infringed on the First Amendment, all three parts. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. And so, once again, that's just another amendment under attack by the left. The Fourth Amendment is gone for all intents and purposes. We're going to have to legislate our way out of that one and then fight the court fights to be able to return the intellectual property of the people of the United States to the people of the United States. Just because I have a cell phone that uses airwaves to be able to send my messaging across the nation doesn't mean that that makes it free game for a government to suck up everything I say, everything I text, every email I send. They don't have probable cause to do that. Landlines, it used to take a judge, after considering probable cause, to eavesdrop on somebody's phone calls. Now, nah. The Federal Data Hub, or federal data hubs, scattered around the country. Immense buildings with, I don't know, millions of servers sucking up everything we say, including this broadcast as you hear it. They don't have any cause to do that. Why are they doing it? Well, because information is power. That's why. There's also a bunch of other things here. The Supreme Court of the land has made it abundantly clear that municipalities, counties, states do have to face a Supreme Court test for laws they pass infringing on the Second Amendment. This is perhaps the most dangerous part of a proposed 28th Amendment by Gavin Newsom. What would this be? Well, the Supreme Court's made it clear that if people want to carry weapons in this nation, they can. And it is a God-given right, not a government-given right. What this would do is would enshrine a government-given right to bear arms. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. It doesn't work for the United States. It certainly hasn't worked for England. It hasn't worked for Australia. It has not worked for Canada. The only thing that fails to raise a hue and cry when it comes to Canada is the epic obedience to the government by the people of Canada. They keep pushing on this, And that will end. Same on this Second Amendment fight. These people are baiting the bulldog. These people are trying to seek another way to divide this nation. And so, here we are. If this was a country with an honest press, then when Gavin Newsom goes down in flames, which he probably won't because he'll never get an Article 5 convention of the states, this is just political blustering. But it does serve as a precursor and a warning to people who vote for these people. This is their intent. Their intent is to make the entire United States safe for political action of any kind. And they want to render the American public defenseless to do something about it. The Second Amendment isn't about personal self-defense. What's Fox talking about? The Second Amendment is for us to defend ourselves through a God-given right from an oppressive and tyrannical government. Do we have an oppressive and tyrannical government? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. So here we go. Do we have an oppressive government? Should we make it more oppressive? Every time we do that, disaster ensues. I can tell you exactly how that works through three initials. DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. The huge bureaucratic behemoth that hangs over all of us every day to save us from terrorism. So, what are you going to do? You going to support the 28th Amendment as envisioned by California Governor Gavin Newsom? Or not? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. I am John David Wells. Our chat room is going. There is more information. There is more news. Speaking of leftist policies impacting the states, there's another leftist policy and a set of leftist policies doing just that. How are the people reacting? We'll tell you next. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to The Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. How is leftist politics doing in these United States? Not well, if the results of those politics are any indication. And by the way, there are. And one of them takes us to Oregon, the state of Oregon. Here's what's going on as reported by Fox News. Wallowa County became the 12th Oregon county to join the Greater Idaho movement when special election results on the measure were finalized on Tuesday of this week. The vote originally took place in May. Preliminary results showed support for the effort, leading by only 21 votes. All votes were finalized in June. The lead shrunk to only 7, narrowly avoiding the state requirement for a recount. The Greater Idaho effort began in 2020 as an idea for large swaths of rural eastern Oregon to secede and join the more conservative Idaho to get away from the western progressive part of the state. With the Wallowa County vote, 12 out of 12 counties that have held an election on Greater Idaho have voted in favor of it. Support for the proposal in the Idaho legislature for formal talks between the two state legislatures about redrawing the border have been split across party lines. Democrats oppose the idea. Republicans applaud it. I'm very pleased this measure has virtually no chance of advancing into reality, said Idaho Senate Minority Leader Melissa Wintrow. It would be bad for all involved, bad for the country, and I oppose it at all levels. In contrast, Republican State Representative Judy Boyle said, "Yep, I'm supportive of the Greater Idaho idea. I've lived along the Oregon border my entire life, so I have many East Oregon friends. They've been quite frustrated with the liberal I-5 Western Oregon corridor running their state and completely ignoring their values and needs. They have finally come down to asking the voters, county by county, if they want to join Idaho. Currently, 11 counties have said yes. Actually, it's 12. Should the Greater Idaho effort be available? Should the Greater Idaho effort be successful? Idaho's population would increase by 21%. An analysis by the Claremont Institute also found that moving the Idaho state line would provide an annual net benefit to the state's government by as much as $170 million. Moving the Idaho-Oregon border would require the approval of both state legislatures and the U.S. Congress. Following Wallowa County results, the Crook County Court also voted in favor of placing the Greater Idaho proposal up for a vote on the May 2024 ballot. So far, Umatilla County and Gilliam County are the only Oregon counties listed in the original proposal of 15 counties to relocate that have not yet set up a vote on the issue. This is what you call the skin of your teeth, said Wallowa County Clerk Sandy Lathrop, remarking on the county's extremely close results, just barely avoiding a recount, which tells you how many people we're dealing with here. It's a very small county. Based on Oregon state law, KOIN reported a recount is required if a measure fails to exceed 1/5 of 1% of the vote. In Wallowa County, 3,497 votes were cast for the Greater Idaho measure, leaving a recount threshold of 6.99 votes. Because the difference in support was only 7 votes, the measure did not go to a recount. So, how do leftist policies work? Poorly. So poorly, in fact, that the map of the United States may be altered by people fed up with those politics. This is something that we've seen before. There are western provinces of Canada that want to join the United States of America because they're tired of leftist politics in their country. Talk about changing the entire border or borders for the sake of politics. Is this what government should be? Especially in a representative democracy, a republic? Is this the way this should be? Is this just a healthy process by the voters of this land? And oh, by the way, in respect to the western provinces of Canada, their land? Is this just something that should be thought of, taken in stride, what have you, passed if possible? Or should it be a very serious shot across the bow of these leftist politicians? That in your wish to change the United States into a political playground, you may indeed change the United States to a completely different looking country. Not based on your policy, based on the anger over your policy. In my opinion, this should be a shot across the bow to leftist politics. And there have been shots across the bow in conservative politics, too. His name was Donald Trump. Did the people of the right get the message? Not so far. Will the people of the left get the message? Not likely. They'd have to give up too much power. And that's something that I don't think they want to do. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. I want to thank you very much for watching and listening to our broadcast today. If you like it, if you think it has value, make sure you share it with your friends. Go to Patreon, patreon.com/The Wells Report, and make a donation to this broadcast. I certainly would appreciate it. I certainly would appreciate it. Thank you. This has been the Wells Report. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of this broadcast. See you then. All right. Thanks very much. By the way, a much better chat room today. Thank you for the participants. Appreciate you guys keeping it civil. It means a lot to me. I've got to go. I've got a terribly important meeting. And oh, by the way, before I go, okay, just wanted to show you what I was wearing under my shirt. We'll be